Whoa! We finally hit 10,000 subscribers! Awesome! We finally made it to 10,000 subscribers. I know that it took a long time to get here, and I know we've got a long way to go, but it still feels like I should do something special to mark the occasion, and viewers have been asking for an updated list on the top worst games I've reviewed, so okay, if you don't think that I do these lists too often, I'll play. These are the top 15 worst games that I've done so far on the channel. Mainly we're doing 15 because a lot of the top slots have formed a block that's hard to penetrate. It'll probably take something that plays PlayStation games so that I can do Bubsy and Batman and Robin. I've decided to go the Brandon's Cult Movie Reviews route of making one definitive list for games up to this point, regardless of whether they were on prior lists or not. If the rankings differ from what I've said previously, well, sorry, this is what I was feeling when I was writing the new list from scratch. Also, same rule as last time, indie downloadable games are not eligible, or else most of it would be hijacked by shit like Air Control, Gilson B. Ponce, and Digital Homicide, and I really don't want that. There are 2 entries on the list that skirt that line, but oh well. Before we get to the list proper, I've got a few dishonorable mentions. Exactly 5, which means this might as well be a top 20 list, but sue me. Bomberman Act 0. Not so much broken as it is a lazily shot out barely a game. One level that you play over and over until you die, and that's it. I know that I had a very angry rant in the video, but that was more utter confusion at how Bomberman's creators missed the point of their own franchise this badly. It's something that you play once or twice and then quit. Unless you're a speedrunner, in which case it's apparently the holy grail. Big Rigs. I know it's sacrilegious to leave this off a worst of list, but come on, we all know that everyone plays this game for free. This isn't a game, it's a joke that you pop in for a few minutes for a cheap laugh. Who Framed Roger Rabbit? A hopelessly broken, bad idea. I don't know who thought to make an entire game around wandering through empty rooms hoping you find inventory items while nothing happens. But given that it was the primitive NES, I'll cut it the barest of slack. Space Camp. It hurts to leave this off the list since this almost feels like a game that I discovered, but the competition for the list was so steep that fundamentally broken on every conceivable level kinda became the basic entry point. Still, it's a Wii game where you pick up rocks for 4 hours. American Ninja Warrior Challenge. This was narrowly edged off the list by number 14, a game licensed on a wildly popular obstacle course TV show in 2019, and not only is the entire game about 12 basic QuickTime event sequences that repeat ad nauseum, but if you play it on a docked Switch, then it has lag measured in full-on seconds, rendering the game unplayable. I'm not playing this on Google Stadia! Cut that shit out! Oh, and it was published by Game Mill Entertainment, who also published Big Rigs, weekly review request subject Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl, and widely dubbed Worst Game of 2021, Nerf Legends. I think I have a new punching bag. And with that, let's get to the proper list. Number 15. I've played a lot of horrifically botched Wii ports. Spider-Man 3 left out about half its campaigns, The Amazing Spider-Man left out its whole sandbox, War for Cybertron turned into a rail shooter, although that one I kinda liked, Transformers Dark of the Moon turned into a driving game where the Transformers never actually transform. But I think the absolute most insulting that it gets is with my number 15, the Wii port of X-Men Destiny. Why? Because at least with the other butchered Wii ports that I've done, you're still getting a finished game! Let's start with the fact that the Wii version of X-Men Destiny completely strips everything out of the main version until it's just button-mashing waves of the same enemy over and over. What really dropped my jaw is that the game completely skips over about half the main version story and doesn't even try to cover or write around it. After about 2 hours, the game just cuts ahead to the final level out of nowhere. You're investigating the mysterious catastrophe that's plagued the city, you're still getting to know the various factions and the big players, you're starting to gather information, and then BAM! Pixie's dead! Magneto's here and he fights you even if you're on his side! Suddenly one of your allies is evil and everyone knows it, and he's working for another villain that nobody knew about, and he's got psychic powers, but your character is immune to it! Not one word of explanation. They don't even try to hide that about half the game is just flat-ass missing. And that alone might not have been enough to crack this list,
But when you start the game, you make a custom character with one of 3 mutant powers and movesets. I didn't try all 3 because this was a library rental, but if you went with the fireball powers, the hit detection completely sharts itself to where most of your attacks don't read as damage, rendering the game completely unplayable. A glitch so bad that you can land 3 ultimate attacks on 1 basic enemy and they won't have taken a scratch. The story of X-Men Destiny's development is long, depressing, and covered much more extensively in the actual video, but the short version, Silicon Knights and their leader, Dennis, had zero interest in the X-Men license and just sat on ass pretending to work on it for 2 years until Activision said this game is shipping in 1 year whether it's finished or not. And near as I can tell, the Wii version was not farmed to a separate developer. It was done in-house by Silicon Knights at the same time they were crunching like mad to get the main version done. So it's probably a safe guess that the Wii version was a very low priority at the company, but still, the level of laziness and not give a shit is astounding with this broken piece of crap. Number 14. Godzilla PS4. I was introduced to Godzilla through the Pipeworks trilogy of video games, the spectacular Destroy All Monsters Melee, and the flawed but still pretty fun Godzilla Unleashed. So I know what a good Godzilla game plays like, and Godzilla PS4 is so not it. You are dropped into a very large, very empty city where you slowly trudge around smashing generators. The military doesn't scratch you, the generators just stall you. You just crawl around so slowly that you can feel yourself dying while nothing happens. The only actual gameplay comes in when you fight other kaiju, and not only is the combat system insanely shallow with little to no tactics or moves, not only does the game just flat-ass never explain an absolutely vital counter mechanic, not only does all combat still move at a snail's pace, the balancing of the fighters is abysmal. For ostensibly being the king of the monsters, Godzilla is pretty low on the roster's food chain. Biollante can whip the shit out of everyone while staying far out of range. The Ghidorahs, Batra, Destroya, and Mothra basically stun lock with their basic attacks. Legendary Godzilla gets a ton of free energy to spam free breath weapons and counters, and the rest blow ass. And since a lot of the unlocks and the secret ending require you to play extensively as Godzilla, you're going to be thrown into wildly unbalanced fights all the freaking time. Especially when the game just decides to auto-kill you and spawns a mega-sized monster that doesn't flinch to your hits, and you have zero chance of beating, yet you get absolutely no bonus awards if you actually beat it. And speaking of the secret ending, just in case all that craptacular gameplay wasn't bad enough for you, getting 100% completion and the rest of the playable characters takes going extra special slow through every level, tediously smashing every last building that you can find, and you can easily get screwed out of said 100% completion for choosing the wrong levels without forewarning. And if you actually want to play the online multiplayer, then you're going to be stuck doing weeks solid of grind for random luck-based items to slowly level up your monsters to where they'll have any chance. And it's blatantly obvious that a solid chunk of the roster has incomplete movesets to boot. Every last design decision is so ass backwards you just wonder, have you dumb bastards ever actually played a game before? And yeah, I know that moving like a snail on Quaaludes is accurate to the Godzilla movies, but you know what else is accurate to the movies? I made a remark in the original review that it didn't feel like the game was designed for monster combat. That's because it wasn't. According to the show What Happened, Godzilla PS4 started as a Japanese exclusive game laser targeted at people that are such uber die-hard fans of the movies that they literally just wanted to stage shots from the movies point for point, with little to no actual gameplay. The rest of the world got a port of a re-release that added improvised and half-assed multiplayer. So in other words, Godzilla PS4 was made for people who literally just like looking at Godzilla and nothing else. But if you're part of the overwhelming vast majority of the population that would prefer an actual game attached to their game, then screw off! They don't want you here. Number 13. Star Wars Flight of the Falcon. This really should have been on prior lists, except that I completely forgot that it existed, let alone that I had covered it. Star Wars Flight of the Falcon is an arcade rail shooter. You fly the Millennium Falcon, or sometimes a speeder or an X-Wing, in a third-person perspective shooting TIE fighters and dodging laser fire. The level design is annoying as hell, with you having to kill a large number of very specific enemies before you hit the end of the stage, and the targeting reticle only gives you a vague idea at best of where you're shooting, so you just kind of mash the fire button and hope for the best. That would be bad enough, except this is running on a Game Boy Advance. Or rather, trying to run on a Game Boy Advance and failing miserably. This game is trying to have several very detailed fully 3D models at a time, running with a far draw distance at a relatively high speed on a 32-bit handheld that isn't capable of anywhere near that level of graphics fidelity. It runs like a hut with a hangover, like a one-legged fathier, like a Y-wing with a flooded exhaust manifold. The controls are horribly sluggish. The game moves at a snail's pace with laggy controls. You can barely friggin' see all the crap that you have to dodge. There are no mid-level checkpoints. Pile all the technical problems onto already dickish game design, and you have a game that's borderline unplayable and deeply unpleasant every second that it's turned on. It doesn't help that one of the worst levels in the game, driving the land speeder through Mos Eisley on a time limit, is an absolute disaster with muddy graphics, shoddy hit detection, and even worse performance, and it comes right at the start of the game. Oh, and you have to complete an entire movie in one sitting, all 6 levels of A New Hope in one stretch, and later all 5 of Return of the Jedi. The worst part of this train wreck is that this came out long after the Attack of the Clones movie license game on the Game Boy Advance, and that game had ship rail shooter levels that were the only good parts of the game. Polygonal models and 2D sprites. It worked perfectly. It was not hard to work around the Game Boy Advance's limitations, but no, this thing was cobbled together by a dev team that apparently didn't bother to check if their game actually ran on their target platform. Number 12. How to Train Your Dragon 2. I'd like to know who in the hell looked at the How to Train Your Dragon movies, full of action, relationship drama, and eventually epic large war scenes, and decided to boil it down to fly through rings for a few hours. But that's the mainline video game tie-in to the second movie. The main characters are competing in a local tournament for fun, and almost all the events are flying through rings for a few hours only for the game to cut off. And yet, for as crappy as the flying through rings genre of video games tends to get, they invented several new ways to screw it up. The rings are so tight and spaced so close together that you basically have zero room for error. Controls change every time you fly straight up or straight down to incorporate wholly worthless rolling. You get huge bursts of speed at random when descending. Most of the items are homing attacks that lose you shitloads of time like Mario Kart designed by dicks. And the characters are abysmally balanced so that Toothless, the protagonist of the series, is vastly slower than most of the other racers and has basically zero chance of winning anything, while side character Hook Fang leaves everyone in the dust and unable to catch up. In fact, abusing this little imbalance is pretty much your only hope for finishing the game. See, the AI characters have the ability to do an attack called the Viking Blitz that just automatically knocks you off your dragon with no chance to avoid it. They can attack you for free, literally any time that they want, regardless of whether they have an item or not. And near as I can tell, you do not have access to this attack. So if you don't get an early lead right at the start of every single race, and keep it, you're hopelessly screwed trying to win anything, since the AI can just decide that you need to eat shit at a moment's notice. And just for that extra touch of the computer cheating, the final tournament kept mysteriously glitching to where I couldn't use items, affecting me, and only me, for several whole races. And literally the only thing to do when you're not in a race is wander around an empty overworld looking for exploration tokens, which if you're a die-hard fan of the movies might be cool for like 15 minutes, but past that, flying through rings with shit controls and cheating bastard opponents for a few hours is the entire game, and how anyone thought they'd get away with that is a mystery for the ages. Number 11. Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine on the Nintendo 64. I hate this game. I don't care how it compares to the PC version. I don't care how advanced it is for a Nintendo 64 game. I don't care if you think my cartridge is broken. This game sucks! And given that it was only available as a Blockbuster rental, the same gateway to such sterling entertainment as Daikatana and Hercules' Legendary Journeys, I think that history is on my side. Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine is a platforming game where the movement controls are garbage. The game would almost never read me running correctly, which means it'd fail to register me doing the running jump, which means I'd die near constantly for no damn reason, just attempting basic navigation. It's an exploration kind of treasure hunting adventure game where several of the levels are so badly laid out that I have no idea how I'd have gotten through without heavily using a walkthrough. Critical paths are just flat ass hidden where you'll never find them. The game is buggy as hell, with glitches the likes I've never seen on the Nintendo 64, and that's even when it's running correctly. The expansion pack to boost the console's RAM is pretty much mandatory for the game, or based on the level that I tried without it, the game just freaking collapses. Physics glitches, inventory glitches, pre-scripted level events breaking, the list goes on and on. Though you might want to yank out the expansion pack since an entire shitty level can't run and actually gets skipped without it. Which reminds me, do vehicle levels sound fun? Too bad! The car level is just you setting up a bunch of painstaking jumps that kill you for not landing them perfectly down to the pixel, and the minecart stage just carries you between foot levels and serves as an excuse to hide key inventory items. But sure, I guess the comments are right and my controller's just broken. That explains why the game's detection is so bad that it won't let me grab ledges enough to climb stairs! But hey, you naysayers are in luck, because I happen to have 4 Nintendo 64 controllers. I used the blue one, which works for literally every other game that I play, but according to the comments, all I need to do is swap out the controller and this pile of shit will run perfectly. Let's try it! The only redeeming quality to the game is that the story is kind of neat as an Indiana Jones globe-trotting treasure hunting story, but stretch it across 20 hours of getting lost and broken controls, it ain't nearly charming enough to redeem this horse shit. Number 10. Drake of the 99 Dragons. Drake is a game about an assassin from a cyberpunk future who dual-wields guns, can slow time, harvest the souls of his enemies to fuel super attacks, and is tasked with guarding a relic that taps into spirit powers and lets him journey to other planes of existence. What could possibly go wrong? In a word, everything. But let's start with how no matter whether you're playing the Xbox version or the PC like I was, the basic shooting flat-ass doesn't work. Due to animation problems with Drake's arms, he just plain refuses to shoot where you're aiming unless you suicide charge every enemy like a complete moron. Don't even try to dodge fire, just kinda hope that the enemies die first. And once you learn to work around the fundamentally broken combat is when all the other problems come seeping in. Catastrophically overpowered enemies to where you die within 2 seconds of entering a room unless you exploit AI bugs that keep them from being able to shoot up or down at you. The platforming barely works due to a combination of bad controls and bugs, the Moon Logic bosses, flat-out useless weapons, and the time-stopping and soul-related powers don't really do anything. Every level boils down to memorization as you constantly bumble into nigh-instant kill death traps that you have basically no way of avoiding the first time. Oh, and by the way, no mid-level checkpoints! And that's just the unbearable gameplay. The story doesn't do any heavy lifting to hold this crap together. Drake of the 99 Dragons was supposed to start a franchise of cartoons, comics, the whole Ninja Turtles bundle, right down to still using slang from the 80s.
You must be out of this world to get past our guards.
Apparently, a large reason why the game is trash is because the game's director had so much overconfidence in Drake as a brand that he threw out QA's mountain of warnings and advice rather than even consider altering his vision. The result of this is that the entire game is built out of the director's inside references to himself, characters and lore that are never explained, leaving you perpetually confused about what the hell is going on. And given that Drake is a dumb goon who constantly fails and gets his ass kicked until winning through sheer attrition, all while bragging about how awesome he is, I don't think Drake's career prospects were that high to begin with. Number 9. There are a lot of shovelware minigame compilations on the Wii, several that I've reviewed and had to leave off this list. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and its whole 4 minigames that don't care if you actually play them. We Wish You a Merry Christmas with its hot garbage clip art graphics and a whole 6 or so unconnected minigames, including flat out stealing elf bowling, or Space Camp, which pads itself out by making you pick up rocks for hours as grind. But I eventually decided that as terrible as all those games are, at least you can play them. Not so much for number 9, Minute to Win It on the Wii. Minute to Win It has the absolute worst motion controls that I have ever seen on the Wii. Not just because the detection is bad, which it is, but because the games are designed to require ludicrously specific input while not telling you what said input is, and making it near impossible to guess. Like a minigame where you pull tissues out of a box of Kleenex, but it only works if the pointer for your remote travels straight vertically up, and I'm pretty sure with a cap on its speed. I got stuck on a marble bouncing minigame that doesn't friggin' tell you what you need to do. Some circles appear and you shake the remote and nothing happens. You fail! And sometimes the directions are flat-ass wrong because they recycle animations from the show, whether they're still accurate or not. I couldn't beat the first set of games out of 4. A full 3/4 of the game was inaccessible to me because one minigame was so broken that I couldn't beat it. I'm not even sure the game's running properly since the game would glitch so that Guy Fieri's speech when you get a game over wouldn't play. He just stands there staring at your abject failure. It honestly still mesmerizes me how a game this flat-ass non-functional gets made. But between Minute to Win It and American Ninja Warrior Challenge, the lesson is clear. Don't buy games based on popular game shows. They will be broken garbage. Number 8. Aquaman Battle for Atlantis. Aquaman may be the bee's knees nowadays thanks to James Wan and Jason Momoa, but for a very long time Aquaman was a complete joke in pop media, and this video game really reflected that lack of give a shit. Aquaman Battle for Atlantis is a beat-em-up game where a few levels in you start fighting horribly unbalanced swarms of enemies that curb stomp you to death and pretty much take pure luck to escape because your combat capabilities are borderline non-existent. You have no good ranged or area effect attacks, and although you get several combo attacks as the game goes on, I couldn't get any of them to work. Enter the correct input for a combo 20 times, maybe once it actually goes off. So you're left with no option but to button mash your enemies to death and just kinda hope for the best. The rest of the game is just swimming around a big, open, completely empty map of Atlantis that they do absolutely nothing cool with, and a few ship-flying levels with floaty controls. The only other noteworthy thing about the game is how unbelievably cheap it is. The wondrous lost city of Atlantis is apparently a lifeless, barren shithole, and the main villain's laughably terrible plan is to destroy it and then rule the pile of rubble that's left behind. I think they only have like 2 enemy types that just get reskinned with more health when you move on to new villains. The cutscenes are crappy unanimated comic stills with text boxes, and the hair, that glorious meme-spewing golden mullet hair that's so laughably poorly animated and just floats and squiggles off Aquaman's head. I wish I had more to say, but it's just a beat-em-up game where the combat controls don't work, there's zilch for enemy variety, and nobody checked to see if the combat was balanced. It's the phrase, "you had one job," personified into a video game. Number 7. Sonic the Hedgehog 2006. Yeah, might be surprised that the game that I picked out for episode 200 is this low on the list, but here we are. Sonic 06 is a wildly ambitious game meant to celebrate the legacy of a gaming icon. 9 playable characters, 3 epic stories, introducing time travel, a huge hub world loaded with side quests, and it's just amazing how, of all the things that they threw at the wall, absolutely none of it works! Sonic's levels? Slow action, uninspired layouts, die constantly to physics glitches. Shadow's levels? Vehicles control like ass at best and are bugged out said ass at worst. Silver's psychic powers slows the game to a crawl on the rare times that they actually work. Omega? Weapons barely work. Knuckles and Rouge? Just glide to the exit and glitchy to boot. Amy? Oops, we forgot to actually tell the player that she can turn invisible, so she doesn't really do anything. Blaze? Actually, she's fun. So let's only give her 2 short levels, and let's heavily recycle the whole 10 levels that we actually got done so that some characters are left to stumble through sections that were blatantly not designed for them. The overworld? Empty, utterly worthless padding that wastes your time. The gems that Sonic gets for equipable powers? Useless at best, completely break the game wide open at worst. And the epic storyline spanning time itself? Nothing happens that matters in any of the 3 campaigns. The time travel mechanics make no sense whatsoever. They try to crowbar in a romance between Sonic and an empty cipher that nobody cares about who gets kidnapped constantly as a sorry excuse to drive the plot. And the villain we know nothing about more or less just decides that he wins at the end, implying that most of his own plan was pointless. Oh, and we're Dragon Ball Z now, because not only is the new character a blatant ripoff of Trunks, but the Chaos Emeralds grant wishes now in this and literally no other game. This is a story so half-assed and rushed that Blaze is here with a wildly different backstory than the other games, and so asinine that the key to unleashing the world's destruction is to get a teenage girl to cry! And all this broken shit because Sega doesn't believe in hiring more devs or pushing back deadlines when half to 3/4 of your staff are poached by other teams. You'd think by sheer law of averages that at least one of the things they tried would have worked, just by chance. The real tragedy of Sonic 06, though, is that it really did completely derail the Sonic franchise, and not just because of the hit to his reputation. Sega is so embarrassed of this game to this day that behind the scenes they've completely banned making any more Sonic games that play like the wildly successful and beloved Sonic Adventure games. So the series has been floundering through several different crap gameplay styles, desperately scrambling for footing ever since. Maybe that's why as time's gone on and more bad Sonic games have been made, Sonic fans have been fighting to convince the world, and probably themselves, that 06 wasn't that bad.
Oh, sweetie, you're so wrong, it makes me want to cry a little.
It would have turned out fine if only it had gotten a proper dev cycle. Ah yes, the bad game wouldn't have been bad if only they'd worked on it until it was good. A brilliant argument that applies to most every bad game in existence. Many fans are crying out in the street for 06 to get a full HD remake so the game can be finished. That won't happen. And several were quick to point me to a fan project remaking the game, but fan mods and a strong sense of denial don't change the fact that the actual game's a piece of shit. The best I can say is that Sonic 06 never breaks to the point of being unplayable, although Silver's levels scrape down awfully close, and that is the low bar for not being at the top of this list. Number 6. Batman: Dark Tomorrow. Dark Tomorrow opens with you dying 1,000,000 times to a platforming segment over rooftops where you attempt to use a grappling hook that's impossible to control and physics that have no bearing on reality to reach buildings that you can't see because the whole game runs on fixed cameras that suck, and that's just the appetizer to this atrocity. On its face, Dark Tomorrow seems like a run-of-the-mill Batman game. You run through city streets and Arkham, beating up henchmen, making your way to villains with big boss fights, hunt a few keys, got a good arsenal of gadgets, except every single last thing in the game is so broken that it's mind-boggling. Not only do enemies attack you in swarms to where your piddly-ass punches and utter lack of area attacks royally screw you, but enemies don't actually stay down unless you can find several seconds in the middle of a hectic fight to stop and bat-cuff every single damn enemy in the narrow window before they get back up. Combat is a perpetual, barely playable crapstorm where you bumble through on an auto-healing medkit hoping for the best. Most of your gadgets do nothing. Some, like the night vision goggles, literally do nothing, because in case the blatantly incomplete maps didn't tip you off, this game was rushed out the door completely unfinished. Some encounters are designed around stealth, only the enemy AI is so botched that stealth is literally impossible. So the only way through large groups is to cheese the living hell out of the game's extremely lenient checkpoint and autosave system. Dying actually helps you, since it respawns you in the same room with refilled gadgets. And did I mention fixed cameras implemented so poorly that basic navigation is a damn puzzle that the Riddler would envy? And don't get me started on the glider section, chock full of invisible walls and operating on such bizarro physics and stiff controls that you constantly die out of nowhere. Probably the biggest dick move, though, is the ending. To get the game's one non-sucky ending, you need to track down a hidden console and hack the computer with your lockpick. I did not stutter, and you need to do this before going to the final battle with Ra's al Ghul. 1, the game does not tell you anything about needing to do this, and 2, you have 2 or 3 bosses before you get to Raish with no breaks. If you haven't disabled the bombs and you save right before the final boss, like an intelligent person, then you are locked out from getting the good ending on that file. If you don't have backups, then you are forced to start the game over. The story is nothing to write home about. Roz pays a bunch of villains to distract Batman from a plan that Batman would never have found out about if he hadn't paid off said villains. The only good things about the game are the absolutely beautiful soundtrack by the London Philharmonic Orchestra and how it's relatively easy to save scum your way to the end. But the process of dragging yourself through painful gameplay, dying constantly, there is no dignity in beating this game. Only pain, suffering, and the need for vengeance. No, not that vengeance. That one sucks too. Number 5. Hunt Down Freeman. This really shouldn't be on the list because Hunt Down the Freeman wasn't even made by a small indie studio. It was made by a bunch of fan modders who submitted assets to a near-anonymous benefactor, completely devoid of context for a third party to stitch together into a monstrosity. But given that Valve had to have signed off on this at some point to allow usage of the Half-Life license, I'm calling it anyway! I'll put this in simple terms for people who don't know Half-Life. You play as an author insertion fanfiction character who's personally hired by one of the biggest characters in the series to secretly facilitate the events of one of the greatest games of all time. You raise an army of elite mercenary pirates and then sell out the human race for petty revenge on Gordon Freeman because, as Mitchell so eloquently puts it,
You fucked up my face.
the story is trying so embarrassingly hard to be dark and edgy
You have my permission to die.
that it's simultaneously hilarious and depressing, with zero likable characters to root for and no reason to give fuck one about anything that happens. Plus, the story twists itself into so many knots trying to make Mitchell a hero and a villain simultaneously that whether you know the franchise or not, this story makes absolutely no sense. And that's just the unbearable storyline. The gameplay is horrid beyond words. Sloppy gunplay where weapons control like shit against horrifically unbalanced swarms of enemies that shrug off your bullets and curb stomp you because someone didn't know how Half-Life plays and put utterly worthless COD weapons into the game. Utterly massive levels that are not only 98% empty, but have zero signposting of any kind so that you're left wandering an empty map for hours on end, trying to figure out what the game wants you to do. A huge and difficult stretch of the game has no medkits because nobody was clear on whether the game would have regenerating health or not. And most infamously, even with patches, the vast bulk of the levels have glitches that render them physically impossible to complete. Invisible walls that can't be crossed, scripted events that don't trigger, puzzles that break and can't be finished, or even if you do hit the end of the stage, a game bug will stop the level from ending. And even when they work right, some levels are so busted that you have to flat-ass ignore the game's objectives. So the first 2/3 of the game are spent blindly wandering from one curb stomping to another, desperately trying to guess at what you're supposed to do, and the last third is spent wandering through empty, disconnected levels with little to no gameplay because, well, we had these maps left over and we might as well use them. The only reason this abomination isn't higher is that the game has built-in cheat codes to fly, phase through walls, and turn invincible, allowing you to just float to the ends of levels at will so that you don't actually have to play it. I played as much of the game without cheat codes as I was physically able, and the experience was pure torture. But by far the most mind-boggling thing about Hunt Down the Freeman, not long after its release, the game's director, Berkan Deniz-Yaran, who was utterly clueless at the game's helm, seemed to know nothing about game development, and had zero other credits to his name, he got hired as production coordinator at Activision Blizzard. One of the biggest companies in the industry hired a guy for a major management position for having made literally nothing but one of the most infamously bad games of all time. That'd be like if Warner Brothers hired Tommy Wiseau for a new Batman movie, fresh off having made The Room. No wonder Activision was such a bloody mess prior to Microsoft's acquisition.
You fucked up my face.
Number 4. World of Simulators, PS4. Again, normally I wouldn't put these indie shovelware heaps of shit on the list, but the fact that these somehow got printed onto an actual PlayStation 4 disc selling in stores for $60, nah, it's fair game. World of Simulators is a collection of indie games that varies from console to console. I got it on the PlayStation 4, where the collection includes Firefighters the Simulation, Professional Construction the Simulation, Forestry Simulator, and Professional Farmer Simulator. All 4 of them boil down to wandering through a completely empty map looking for something to do. Firefighters is the only one with actual activity, since it has you analyze suspicious substances, fight fires by gearing up and shooting them with water, rescue civilians, and escort vehicles with big-ass fire trucks that control like gas, and where you fail if you bump a single obstacle. But the game is so horribly designed, with you sitting on ass waiting for missions to start with nothing to do in the meantime, and the random generation of the missions having you spend hours bored shitless cleaning up one damn oil spill after another. But that still leaps and bounds ahead of Construction Simulator, where the entire game is drive the slowest vehicles that have ever existed across town 50 times for no reward, except for money that you can use to buy even slower vehicles that do the exact same damn thing. This isn't even accurate to real life. Actual companies not only have a full staff working job so that the tedious work goes faster, most companies use courier services and transportation trucks to carry the hideously expensive and not street-ready equipment from job to job. You don't freaking do anything in this game! Forestry is so broken that once you cut down a few trees, you can hire on staff to work for you and basically sit back and let the game play itself. Beats having to drive across the map and trudge back to the one checkpoint at your home base in vehicles that control like ass day after day. And Farmer Simulation not only amounts to a single lawn mowing activity that takes forever and a half and has to be done several times a field, not only has you driving the slowest cars on Earth across a huge map looking for fields, but the game also seems to be broken, since I scoured the entire map and just flat out could not find a lot of vital equipment or places to buy critical items for livestock. And yes, these 4 Steam Direct Asset Flip Shovelware dung heaps are put onto PS4 discs that sell on major racks in major stores right next to massive AAA titles for the same $60. And it's a complete rip-off. 4 games that do nothing but waste your time, where you not only do nothing, you do it agonizingly slowly. I did eventually get an actual explanation for how these games not only keep getting made, but got printed onto a disc, because for reasons that I cannot fathom, apparently these simulator games are huge, and I mean huge, in Germany. Like, professional competition's huge. This shit is like Fortnite over there. And unless it's a convoluted form of penance for the Nazis, I have no friggin' idea how that's possible. And yes, the specific games in the package seem to change from platform to platform, so this rabbit hole might have to be plumbed deeper one day. When I'm good and drunk. Number 3, Carmageddon 64. Titus was like the Nintendo 64 generation's LJN, a mostly publisher but occasional developer that consistently put out some of the most mind-bogglingly horrible games of the generation. And Carmageddon 64 is one of the worst. A driving game that is horrifically, inconceivably broken in ways that frankly blow the mind, and it all begins with the level design. Rather than designing proper courses like a normal damn racing game, each level is basically a completely open mini sandbox with no signposting whatsoever. Often you have to guess where the checkpoints are hidden. It takes multiple trial runs just to figure out where the path through any given level actually is, and the whole time you play you're fighting your damnedest against the controls. The turning is wildly slippery, completely oversensitive, and laggy all at the same time. Cross that with a physics engine that will have you climb walls like Spider-Man every time you graze a wall, and obnoxiously designed levels that'll throw you off a cliff for a slight mistake. They actually had to incorporate a teleportation ability that warps you a few feet back along the track in a last-ditch effort to keep this game halfway playable. And the money is so laughably worthless that you effectively have unlimited health. Another blatant patch to keep the game playable? I need to stop calling this a racing game because the other drivers cannot actually win a race. There are 3 ways to win a level in Carmageddon 64. Option 1, kill all the zombies. Zombies infest the course and you can run them over, except the very first level has 80 zombies and 40 get added on top in each subsequent batch of stages. So tracking down each and every last one of them in a big open sandbox map ain't happening. Option 2, you can kill the other 3 drivers. Problem there is, this ain't Mario Kart. There are no useful weapons to kill the other cars, so you have no choice but to ram them about 50 times a piece and just hope that it takes. Itself nigh impossible because AI cars will drive the course perfectly and at high speed anytime they're not in direct sight. If an enemy gets away from you once, they're freaking gone. So that leaves option 3. Drive through all the checkpoints in order for a set number of laps in a time limit. This is basically the only way to clear levels and progress the game, and it becomes nigh impossible too. Each new set of levels adds another lap that needs to be completed, and by what I assume is the halfway point where I rage quit, it takes 8 damn laps to finish a single race. Not only does one level take at least half a damn hour to finish, but you aren't given anywhere near enough time to finish a race. So you have to boost your time by killing zombies or attacking the other racers, which is barely a thing. Every level becomes a half-hour long, utterly luck-based mission, and it only gets worse from there. This game just becomes freaking unplayable. It's a testament to the failure of Titus that Carmageddon 64 is one of the worst games ever made, and it's not even in the top 2 of dumpster fires that the company is known for. Number 2. What do you get when an indie studio wants to make a massive open world game but has absolutely no experience making anything in that ballpark and ends up having to slash almost everything midstream because they're too inept to make it? You get Batman Dark Tomorrow, but if you throw in a dash of ripping off Sons of Anarchy and then slip into development hell until long after the show's off the air, then you get number 2, Ride to Hell Retribution. You play as Jake Conway, a Vietnam War veteran who returns home to find his town in the bloody grip of a violent biker gang. And when his brother Mikey is killed by said gang, Jake will become a full-blown domestic terrorist that kills so many innocent people, causes millions in property damage, and tortures a whole lot of bad guys to uncover a plot to kill his family over a bet with his dad. No, really. And the game never acknowledges that Jake is a villain. He's treated as our moral hero as he murders tons of civil workers and blows up a power plant, causing mile-long radius blackouts because he couldn't think of any other way past an electric fence. Also, women are helpless literal sex objects who exist only to be rescued from rapists and abusers in exchange for good plowing. Sex is a thing you can do with both parties fully clothed and bumping into each other like dead-eyed mannequins, and we didn't bother to introduce anything about the main villain until about a half an hour before the endgame. The storyline of Ride to Hell is a truly baffling odyssey, but if storyline were a key factor for getting on this list, then Metroid Other M would be here. Combat wants to be Arkham Asylum, but is made by people who didn't play Arkham Asylum, so everything's bad and doesn't work right, and you can get out of every fight by spamming the guard break kick that enemies can't do anything to avoid. You could just use the guns and skip the melee combat entirely if the game's controls weren't so cluttered that I still don't know how to tell the game to switch between fists and guns. The driving, slippery controls, busted physics, quick-time events that don't work, and obnoxious level designs, on top of some levels that turn the motorcycle into a rail shooter that controls like shit and demands so much accuracy on a shaky screen that you die a lot. But the part that tested my patience like nothing else was the gun combat. Enemies take about 20 bullets apiece to put down unless every single bullet that you fire is an extremely precisely aimed headshot. And since the PC port has abysmally mapped controls that make fine aiming flat-ass impossible, this rendered the vast majority of the game an utterly soul-rending test of patience. It also renders the bulk of the game's weapons completely pointless. Several of the levels are so badly designed and unbalanced that they become maddening to try and clear, and the piece of shit is padded to high holy hell with what were at one point intended as side quests, but are now mandatory and interrupt the actual important parts of the game. Oh, and the game is bugged out the ass, the graphics are completely hideous, and the voice acting is done by people who, according to IMDb, never acted before or after. The heinous presentation and goofy, jaw-droppingly misaimed story almost elevate the game to so bad it's good, but if you actually try and play it, you'll be swiftly reminded that's not really a thing for video games. It's so bad that it's horrible. And the number 1 worst game that I've reviewed is still Superman 64. Yep, all these years later, Superman 64 still takes the crown. Kinda makes me wish it wasn't one of my earliest videos reflecting some of my worst video quality. It cannot be stressed enough just how much this game is busted and bogged down to its core to the point of being virtually unplayable. You're all familiar with the infamous opening level of flying through courses of rings with insanely oversensitive controls at high speed, with rings spaced so tightly that you need ludicrous accuracy to pass the first stage, and with a time limit that only barely lets you clear the course, and abysmal draw distance to see what's ahead, and a clunky fluctuating frame rate, and physics so borked that grazing an object gets you stuck, and followed by missions where you're given mere seconds to react or else redo the ring course. Half the game's levels are like this and only get more obnoxious, by the way, but the pure torture ring stages aren't even the worst of what this game has in store for you. Half the game's levels are indoor maze levels where you have to get to the end, fight a boss, don't worry, all they do is half-heartedly punch at you, and usually do some objective like operate a computer or rescue one of Superman's friends. The problem is that each level is packed to the brim with utter moon logic puzzles to where you have absolutely no idea where to go or what in the hell you're supposed to do. And between strictly timed segments, how easy it is to die, and with every level having to be cleared with one life and no checkpoints, the process of puzzling out how to clear each level gets utterly maddening. And I still never figured out how to beat Metallo's stage without cheating. I'm convinced the game just glitched and didn't end the stage when it was supposed to. The game is also bugged to high holy hell, with tons of levels coming to a very abrupt end because I fell or flew through a wall and rendered the stage unwinnable. It isn't even fun to be Superman, since your powers run on strict ammo that you need to collect. The X-ray vision literally does nothing. Your only combat options are a shit punch or trying to fly into people, and everything in the game explodes and deals a ton of damage to you because the controls suck too badly to get away. They forgot to program the final boss! The final puzzle is bugged to kill you at random, even if you're game sharking it for unlimited health. If you didn't play the game on hard mode, it just cuts off and makes you start over. The ending is Lex Luthor laughing at you! If anything, the legends undersell how horrible Superman 64 is. Your brain just melts while trying to play it. Everyone who got stuck on the first level and gave up, you are the lucky ones. Count yourselves fortunate that you haven't stared into the abyss and had your soul tested to its very limits. And that's my up-to-date list of the worst games that I've reviewed. Got another game you think should have been on here, or mad that something took up a spot? Comment and feed the algorithm. And we'll be back to the perpetual struggle to dethrone the slots on this list after a big project that's been coming up for a while.